The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Harrington Conservatory, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Maylin's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as she made her way to practice room number 7. It was barely 6 in the morning, but May preferred these quiet hours when she could play without feeling like everyone was judging her. At 17, May was already considered one of the most technically skilled pianists at the conservatory. Her fingers could dance across the keys with precision that made her teachers nod in approval. But something was missing and everyone knew it, including May. Technical perfection without emotion is just typing, her previous teacher had told her before retiring. Those words haunted May, especially now that she was about to meet her new instructor for the first time. May set her worn leather bag down beside the baby grand piano. The instrument gleamed in the early light, its surface so polished she could see her reflection. A thin girl with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, eyes shadowed from too many late nights practicing. She stretched her fingers, rolling her shoulders to release the tension that seemed to live there permanently these days. She began her warm-up scales, losing herself in the familiar routine. The notes flowed effortlessly, each one precise and measured. She closed her eyes, trying to feel something beyond the mechanical movements of her fingers. Your technique is flawless, and that's the problem. May's eyes flew open, her hands freezing above the keys. She hadn't heard anyone enter. Standing in the doorway was a tall woman with silver-streaked black hair cut in a sharp bob. Her posture was perfect, shoulders back, chin slightly raised. She wore a simple black dress that somehow looked more formal than evening wear on anyone else. "Dr. Graves," May whispered, instantly recognizing the woman whose recordings she'd studied for years. Eleanor Graves was a legend in the classical piano world. Her interpretations of Chopin were considered definitive by many critics. And now somehow she was May's new teacher. "You're early," Dr. Graves said, checking her watch. "I appreciate punctuality." She walked into the room, her heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. "But I wonder if you're here early because you love the music or because you're afraid of not being perfect." May's cheeks burned. How could this woman see through her so quickly? I just wanted to warm up properly before our lesson." Dr. Graves nodded, though her expression suggested she didn't entirely believe May. "Well, since you're warmed up, let's begin. What were you planning to play for me today?" May reached for her music folder. "I prepared Bach's Prelude in C major from the Well-Tempered Clavier." Dr. Graves raised an eyebrow. "A safe choice. Very safe." The way she said it made safe sound like a character flaw. May felt her confidence wavering already. She placed the sheet music on the stand, though she had memorized the piece months ago. "Go ahead," Dr. Graves said, taking a seat in a straight-backed chair near the piano. Her posture remained impeccable, hands folded neatly in her lap. May took a deep breath and began to play. The familiar notes of Bach's Prelude filled the room. She played each note perfectly, her timing exact, her fingering textbook. As she reached the midpoint of the piece, she glanced quickly at Dr. Graves. The older woman's face was completely neutral, giving away nothing. May turned her attention back to the keys, focusing even harder on playing each note precisely. When she finished, the final chord hung in the air for a moment before fading. May waited for feedback, her hands now resting in her lap. Dr. Graves was silent for so long that May began to wonder if she'd done something terribly wrong. "Tell me," Dr. Graves finally said, "why do you play the piano?" The question caught May off guard. I've been playing since I was 4. My mother was a pianist and—" "That's not what I asked," Dr. Graves interrupted. "I didn't ask why you started. I asked why you play now." May struggled to find an answer that wouldn't sound hollow. The truth was complicated. She played because it was what she had always done, because her mother had given up her own promising career when she became pregnant with May, and now lived vicariously through her daughter's achievements. Because she was good at it, one of the few things she felt confident about. But also because sometimes, rarely but sometimes, she found moments when the music transported her somewhere beyond the practice room, beyond the constant pressure to be perfect. "I play because—" May hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I play because I'm searching for something in the music that I haven't quite found yet." Dr. Graves's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "That's the first honest thing you've communicated since I walked in this room." She stood up and approached the piano. Your Bach was technically perfect, every note exactly as written, every rhythm precise, and utterly pedestrian. The criticism stung, but May had been expecting it. Dr. Graves was known for her brutal honesty. You play like someone who's afraid to make a mistake, and that fear is louder than the music. Dr. Graves gestured to the piano. Play something else. Not Bach, something you love, not something you think will impress me. May's mind raced through her repertoire. What did she love? She had spent so long choosing pieces that would showcase her technical abilities that she wasn't sure anymore. I don't need to hear another perfectly executed piece, Dr. Graves said, seeming to read May's thoughts. I want to hear you play something that matters to you. May hesitated, then placed her fingers on the keys. She began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece she'd learned years ago and still returned to when she played just for herself. It wasn't as technically challenging as many pieces in her repertoire, but there was something about the dreamlike quality that had always spoken to her. As she played, she tried to focus on the feeling of the music rather than the perfect execution of each note. About halfway through, she made a small mistake. Nothing major, just a slightly rushed phrase, and tensed, waiting for Dr. Graves to stop her. But the older woman remained silent, watching intently. May continued, trying to recapture the flow of the piece. By the final gentle notes, she had almost forgotten Dr. Graves was there. When she finished, she looked up uncertainly. There, Dr. Graves said quietly. For about 8 seconds in the middle, you forgot to be perfect. And that's when I finally heard something interesting. She walked to the window, looking out at the conservatory grounds. You have extraordinary technical ability, May, but technique without expression is hollow. My mother says expression will come with mastery, May said, immediately regretting bringing her mother into the conversation. Dr. Graves turned back to her, eyes sharp. Your mother is wrong. Expression doesn't come from mastery. True mastery comes from having something to express. She returned to the piano, standing beside it with one hand resting on its polished surface. Tell me about your mother. She was a pianist? May nodded. She was on track for a concert career. But then she had me and she trailed off. The familiar weight of that unfinished dream settling on her shoulders. And now you carry the burden of her unfulfilled ambitions. Dr. Graves finished for her. It wasn't a question. May looked down at the keys, unable to meet Dr. Graves's penetrating gaze. That explains a great deal, Dr. Graves said. You play like someone performing for a judge, not like someone making music. She took a seat beside May on the bench, maintaining a respectful distance. For our next lesson, I want you to prepare Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, number 2. May nodded, relieved to have a specific assignment. I know that piece. I've played it before. Good, but this time I want you to play it as if no one is listening. Not your mother, not me, not the ghost of Chopin himself. Dr. Graves stood up. And I want you to make at least 3 deliberate mistakes. Mistakes? May was horrified. On purpose? Yes, and I'll know if they're not deliberate. Dr. Graves gathered her things. You're so afraid of imperfection that it's strangling your music. Sometimes we need to break something to rebuild it properly. As Dr. Graves headed for the door, she paused. You have a gift, May. But gifts can become burdens if we're not careful. Her expression softened slightly. I don't expect perfection from you. That might be the most important thing for you to understand. After Dr. Graves left, May sat at the piano for a long time, her fingers hovering over the keys. Play with deliberate mistakes? It went against everything she'd been taught. Everything her mother had drilled into her since she was old enough to reach the piano keys. Yet something about Dr. Graves's words resonated with a doubt that had been growing inside her. What if perfection wasn't the goal? What if there was something beyond the flawless execution she'd been chasing for years? May began to play the Chopin Nocturne, letting her fingers find the familiar patterns. Halfway through, she deliberately held a note too long, creating a small disruption in the rhythm. The mistake felt both terrifying and strangely freeing. Outside the practice room, Dr. Graves paused, listening to the hesitant experimentation coming from within. A small smile crossed her face before she continued down the hallway, her footsteps fading into the quiet morning of the conservatory. 3 months passed in a blur of lessons, practice, and more practice. May's life narrowed to the space between her dormitory room and practice room 7. Her roommate, Zoe, barely saw her except late at night when May would stumble in, fingers cramped and eyes heavy with exhaustion. "You missed dinner again," Zoe said one evening, looking up from her biology textbook as May entered their shared room. "I saved you a sandwich from the dining hall." May smiled gratefully, taking the wrapped sandwich and sitting heavily on her bed. "Thanks, I lost track of time." "You always lose track of time," Zoe said, but her tone was gentle rather than accusatory. "How's it going with the dragon lady?" Despite her exhaustion, May laughed at the nickname the conservatory students had given Dr. Graves. "She's not as scary as everyone thinks." This wasn't entirely true. Dr. Graves was intimidating, but over the months, May had come to appreciate the older woman's directness. At least with Dr. Graves, she always knew where she stood. "She made Lee Chen cry last week," Zoe pointed out, "and he's been playing since before he could walk." May shrugged, unwrapping her sandwich. "She just sees through all the technical stuff to what's underneath. Or what's not there." She took a bite, suddenly realizing how hungry she was. "She pushes because she believes we can do better." "If you say so," Zoe said, unconvinced. "Just don't let her push you off a cliff." Later that night, as May lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Zoe's words echoed in her mind. Was Dr. Graves pushing her too hard? The assignments had grown increasingly challenging over the past 3 months. May had progressed from deliberately making mistakes, which still felt wrong, somehow, to experimenting with different interpretations of the same piece, sometimes playing a gentle nocturne with unexpected force or a typically bold piece with delicate restraint. It was uncomfortable, this constant pushing against her instincts, but May couldn't deny that something was changing in her playing. She'd caught glimpses of it, moments when the music seemed to flow through her rather than from her, when she stopped thinking about the notes and just felt them. The next morning, May arrived at her lesson to find Dr. Graves already seated at the piano, playing a piece May didn't immediately recognize. The music was complex and thundering, with runs that seemed to require impossibly quick fingers and stretches that must have spanned nearly an octave and a half. Dr. Graves finished with a flourish and turned to May. "What did you think?" "It was," May searched for the right words. "Powerful, intimidating." Dr. Graves smiled slightly. "Yes, it is. That was Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 in D minor. Some consider it the most technically challenging piano concerto ever written." She stood up from the piano bench. "And it's what you'll be playing for your scholarship audition." May felt the blood drain from her face. "What? But I can't possibly—" You can and you will," Dr. Graves said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "The audition is in 8 weeks. Just enough time if you work diligently. But I was planning to play the Chopin." "The Chopin is safe?" Dr. Graves interrupted. "You play it beautifully now, with real feeling. But the scholarship committee won't be impressed by safe choices." May felt panic rising in her chest. "Dr. Graves, please. That piece is beyond me. It would take months just to learn the notes, let alone interpret it properly." Dr. Graves studied May for a long moment. "Perhaps I've been mistaken about you," she said finally, her voice cool. "I thought you were ready for a real challenge." The words stung more than they should have. After 3 months of pushing herself beyond what she thought possible, after finally beginning to break through her own walls, to be told she wasn't ready felt like a betrayal. "I've worked harder than anyone," May said, her voice tight with emotion. "I've done everything you asked." "Yes, within the boundaries of what you believed you could do," Dr. Graves replied. "But true growth happens when we step beyond those boundaries." She handed May a folder containing the sheet music for the Rachmaninoff. "The question is not whether you can play this piece perfectly in 8 weeks. The question is what you'll discover about yourself by trying." May took the folder, her hand trembling slightly. "And if I fail?" Dr. Graves's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Then you will have failed reaching for something extraordinary, rather than succeeding at something ordinary." She checked her watch. "Our lesson time is up. I expect you to have the first movement's main themes worked out by next week." After Dr. Graves left, May opened the folder and stared at the sheet music. The page was black with notes, complex rhythms, and dynamic markings that seemed to demand superhuman abilities. Her stomach clenched with anxiety. This wasn't just difficult, it was impossible. For a moment, she considered going to the conservatory director and asking for a different instructor. But something stopped her, pride maybe. or the memory of those rare moments when her playing had transcended mere technique and touched something deeper. That afternoon, May skipped her music theory class and locked herself in practice room 7. She started slowly, picking apart the first few measures of the Rachmaninoff, trying to make sense of the complex patterns. By evening, her fingers were cramping, and she'd progressed only through the first page. Days blended into weeks. May practiced until the security guard forced her to leave the building at night and returned as soon as it opened in the morning. She ate meals at the piano, when she remembered to eat at all. Her other classes suffered, but she couldn't bring herself to care. Zoe grew increasingly concerned. "You look awful," she told May one morning as they passed in the hallway. "When was the last time you slept a full night?" May couldn't remember. Her dreams, when she did sleep, were filled with endless piano keys and impossible finger patterns. Sometimes she woke up with her hands moving, trying to work out a difficult passage even in sleep. During lessons, Dr. Graves was relentless. She would stop May mid-phrase, making her repeat passages over and over until her fingers felt like they would break. "Again," she would say, "your left hand is rushing. Again, your dynamics are flat. Again, you're thinking about the notes instead of the music." 4 weeks in, May had the notes mostly under her fingers, but the piece still sounded mechanical, fragmented. She couldn't seem to connect the technical demands with any kind of emotional expression. "It's like watching someone trying to recite poetry in a language they don't speak," Dr. Graves said after a particularly frustrating lesson. "You're saying all the words, but you don't understand what they mean." "I'm trying," May said, exhaustion making her voice crack. "I'm trying as hard as I can." Dr. Graves shook her head. "That's the problem. You're trying too hard to be perfect and not hard enough to be honest." The weeks continued to pass and May's frustration grew. She could play through the entire first movement now, but it still didn't sound right to her ears. Sometimes she found herself hating the piano, hating Rachmaninoff, hating Dr. Graves for pushing her into this impossible situation. But she kept going, driven by something beyond mere stubbornness. A need to prove to herself that she could do this, that she was more than just a technically proficient pianist. 2 weeks before the audition, May arrived for her lesson feeling defeated. She'd been up most of the night, practicing the same difficult passage over and over without improvement. Her right wrist ached, and she'd developed a persistent headache from lack of sleep. Dr. Graves was already in the room, examining the piano as if looking for imperfections. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting. "Thank you," May replied, too tired for politeness. "I feel terrible too." "Show me what you've accomplished since our last lesson," Dr. Graves said, taking her usual seat. May sat at the piano and began to play. Her fingers moved through the now familiar patterns of the Rachmaninoff, but everything felt off. Her timing was slightly rushed, her dynamics uneven. When she reached the difficult passage that had kept her up all night, she stumbled, hitting several wrong notes in succession. Dr. Graves raised her hand. "Stop." May's hands froze above the keys. "This isn't working," Dr. Graves said, her voice unusually quiet. "You're pushing yourself toward a breaking point and it's affecting your playing." May felt tears of frustration building. "I told you this piece was too difficult. I told you I couldn't do it in 8 weeks. And I told you the goal wasn't perfection," Dr. Graves replied. "The goal was to push beyond your boundaries." She stood up and approached the piano. "Let's try something different. Play it again, but this time I want you to forget everything you think you know about this piece. Forget technique, forget me. Just play." May took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys once more, tears now freely streaming down her face. She was beyond caring about impressing Dr. Graves, beyond worrying about the scholarship, beyond even her own expectations. She was simply too exhausted to maintain the walls she'd built around herself, and so, with nothing left to lose, she began to play. Something strange happened as May's fingers touched the keys. Perhaps it was the exhaustion breaking down her defenses, or the tears blurring her vision so she couldn't focus on the sheet music. Whatever the reason, she stopped trying to play the Rachmaninoff perfectly and simply let the music flow through her hands. The opening chords resonated through the room with a richness that surprised her. As she moved into the first main theme, her fingers found a rhythm that felt natural rather than forced. She wasn't thinking about which finger went where or counting beats in her head. For the first time since she'd begun learning this impossible piece, she was just Playing. The music took on a life of its own, sometimes gentle, sometimes thundering, flowing like water finding its way downhill. May's tears continued to fall, but she barely noticed them now. Her body swayed slightly with the music, no longer rigid with concentration. When she reached the passage that had kept her up all night, the one she'd stumbled over just minutes ago, her hands seemed to know what to do without her conscious direction. Dr. Graves remained silent, watching intently. There was something different in her gaze now. Not the critical assessment May had grown accustomed to, but something deeper, more complex. As May played through the development section, the emotional intensity of the music mirrored her own internal state. All the frustration, the fear of failure, the pressure she'd felt, not just these past weeks but throughout her years of playing, poured through her fingers into the keys. It wasn't a perfect performance by any technical standard. She missed notes here and there, rushed some passages and lingered too long on others. But there was something alive in the music that hadn't been there before. She was nearing the cadenza, the most technically demanding, part of the first movement, when Dr. Graves suddenly raised her hand. "Stop," she said quietly. May's hands froze above the keys, the last notes hanging in the air. She felt oddly disoriented, as if waking from a deep dream. She looked at Dr. Graves, waiting for the critique that would surely follow. But Dr. Graves just sat there, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock and May's uneven breathing. "Dr. Graves?" May finally whispered, her voice hoarse. "What's wrong?" Dr. Graves blinked, seeming to come back to herself. "Nothing is wrong," she said, her voice unusually gentle. "On the contrary." May wiped her tear-stained face with the back of her hand. "But you stopped me." "I was making mistakes." "Yes, you were," Dr. Graves interrupted. "Technical mistakes. But for the first time you were making music." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the conservatory grounds where spring was just beginning to touch the trees with new green. "Do you understand what happened just now?" May thought about it. She wasn't sure she could explain the strange experience in words. "It felt different," she said finally, "like I wasn't fighting the piano anymore." "Exactly." Dr. Graves turned back to her. "You stopped trying to control every aspect of the performance and allowed yourself to be vulnerable, to feel the music rather than just execute it." She returned to her chair, sitting closer to May than usual. "Tell me, what were you thinking about while you were playing?" May shook her head. "I wasn't thinking at all. That's what was different. Usually my head is full of technical instructions and worries about making mistakes. But this time my mind was quiet." Dr. Graves nodded. "That's the paradox of artistic expression. We spend years mastering technique only to realize that true mastery comes when we can let the technique fall away and simply express what's inside us." She leaned forward. "The question is, what's inside you, May? What were you expressing just now?" May looked down at her hands resting on the keys. They seemed both familiar and strange to her now. "Everything, I guess. All the pressure I've been under. Not just these past weeks, but always." She hesitated, then added in a smaller voice, "My mother's expectations, my own fear of failure, the feeling that no matter how well I play, it's never enough." Dr. Graves was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had an unfamiliar softness to it. "I had a teacher once who told me that great pianists don't play notes, they play what's between the notes. The silence, the anticipation, the release." She looked directly at May. "What you just played wasn't perfect Rachmaninoff, but it was perfect May Lin, and that's far more interesting." May felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, a weight she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "So what happens now?" she asked. "The scholarship audition is in 2 weeks. I still don't have the entire concerto learned." "Now we build on what just happened," Dr. Graves said. "We find a balance between the technical foundation you've developed and the emotional truth you just discovered." She stood up. "Take the rest of today off. Get some sleep. Eat a proper meal. Tomorrow we'll start fresh." As May gathered her things to leave, Dr. Graves added, "And May, remember how this felt. This is what we've been working toward all along." That night, for the first time in weeks, May slept deeply and without dreams of endless piano keys. When she woke the next morning, her mind felt clearer, her body less tense. She actually tasted her breakfast instead of just swallowing it mechanically between mental rehearsals of difficult passages. Zoe noticed the change immediately. "You look different." she said as May prepared to leave for her practice session. Less like a zombie, more like a human. May laughed. I feel different too. She hesitated, then added, I think I finally understood something important yesterday. About playing, but also about everything, I guess, Zoe smiled. Well, whatever it is, it looks good on you. Just don't let the dragon lady erase it. She won't, May said with newfound confidence. In fact, I think she's the one who helped me find it. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur, but a different kind of blur than the previous 6 weeks had been. Instead of mindlessly drilling difficult passages until her fingers cramped, May worked more intelligently. She still practiced for long hours, but now she took breaks when she needed them, allowed herself to experiment with different interpretations, and, most importantly, tried to recapture that feeling of surrender she'd experienced in her breakthrough moment. Some days it worked better than others. There were still times when she became frustrated, when the technical demands of the piece seemed impossible, when her old habits of perfectionism crept back in. But whenever that happened, she would stop, close her eyes, and remember Dr. Graves's words. True mastery comes when we can let the technique fall away. Dr. Graves, too, seemed different in their lessons. She was still demanding, still pushed May to her limits, but there was a new respect in her manner, as if May had passed some invisible test and proven herself worthy of being treated as a peer rather than just a student. 3 days before the scholarship audition, they were working through the final movement of the concerto. May had played it through once, and now Dr. Graves was helping her refine specific passages. The transition here needs to breathe more, Dr. Graves said, pointing to a spot in the music. You're rushing from one theme to the next without giving the listener time to absorb the change in mood. May nodded, making a note on her score. She understood now what Dr. Graves meant by breathe. Not just a technical pause, but an emotional space between musical ideas. Let's try it again, Dr. Graves said. From the development section, May positioned her hands and began to play. She was deeply focused but not tense, her body moving naturally with the music. When she reached the transition point, she allowed a small space, just a fraction of a second, before moving into the new theme. Dr. Graves nodded approvingly. Yes, like that. Do you hear the difference? I do, May said, and she meant it. The music felt more organic, more alive with that small breathing space. Good. Dr. Graves glanced at the clock. We have time for one more run-through of the entire movement. Then I want to discuss something important with you. May played through the final movement once more. It wasn't perfect. There were still a few rough spots, a few passages where her fingers didn't quite cooperate. But the music had a cohesiveness, an emotional arc that carried through from beginning to end. When she finished, Dr. Graves was silent for a moment, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. May, she said finally, I want you to consider something. The scholarship audition is an important opportunity, and I have no doubt that you will play well. She paused. But I'm wondering if Rachmaninoff is really the piece you should play. May stared at her, confused. But we've been working on this for 8 weeks. You said the committee wouldn't be impressed by safe choices. I did say that, Dr. Graves acknowledged, and it was true. But I'm beginning to think that the greatest risk might be something else entirely. She looked intently at May. Tell me, if you could play anything for this audition, anything at all, what would you choose? The question caught May off guard. She'd been so focused on mastering the Rachmaninoff that she hadn't allowed herself to think about alternatives. But now, faced with Dr. Graves's unexpected question, a different possibility began to take shape in her mind. May's fingers hovered over the piano keys as she considered Dr. Graves's unexpected question. What would she play if she could choose anything? May began, then stopped. A thought had been forming in the back of her mind these past weeks, something she'd barely acknowledged even to herself. There's a piece I've been working on. Not for lessons, just for me. Dr. Graves raised an eyebrow, interest flickering across her usually guarded face. Your own composition? May nodded, feeling suddenly shy. It's probably not good enough. Play it, Dr. Graves said, cutting off May's self-doubt. Let me hear it. May took a deep breath. She'd never played her own music for anyone before, not even her mother. It felt more revealing somehow than playing Chopin or Bach or even Rachmaninoff. This wasn't just her interpretation of someone else's thoughts. These were her own thoughts, her own feelings, transformed into sound. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The piece started softly, almost hesitantly, with a simple melody in the right hand over gently rolling chords in the left. The theme was melancholic but not without hope, like someone telling a sad story but with the promise of a happier ending. Gradually the music became more complex, the melody fragmenting and then reforming in unexpected ways, the harmonies shifting between major and minor keys. As she played, May forgot about Dr. Graves sitting beside her. She forgot about the scholarship audition, about her mother's expectations, about everything except the music flowing from her fingers. This piece had become a kind of diary for her over the past few months, each section reflecting her emotional journey through the challenges Dr. Graves had set her. The middle section grew more turbulent, with rapid runs and dissonant chords that somehow resolved into moments of unexpected beauty. This was the part she'd composed during her most frustrated practice sessions with the Rachmaninoff. And then, as the piece moved toward its conclusion, the original theme returned, but transformed, stronger, more confident, yet with a new gentleness. When the final notes faded, May kept her hands on the keys, afraid to look at Dr. Graves. The silence in the room felt heavy with possibility. "How long have you been composing?" Dr. Graves asked, her voice quiet but intense. May finally looked up. "I don't really think of it as composing. I just play what I feel sometimes, and if I like it, I try to remember it. That's what composing is," Dr. Graves said. She leaned forward. "May, that piece has flaws. The development is a bit uneven, and some of the transitions need refining. But it has something much rarer than technical perfection. It has authenticity." May felt warmth spread through her chest at the unexpected praise. "Thank you, but I can't play this for the scholarship audition. They're expecting classical repertoire." Dr. Graves smiled, a rare, genuine smile that transformed her usually stern face. "Actually, the requirements state only that the piece must demonstrate the applicant's technical and interpretive abilities. Nothing says it can't be an original composition." "But what about the Rachmaninoff?" May asked. "We've worked so hard on it." "The Rachmaninoff served its purpose," Dr. Graves said. "It pushed you beyond what you thought possible technically and emotionally. But now that I've heard your composition—" She paused, considering her words. "I believe this is the braver choice." May's heart raced. Playing her own music for the scholarship committee, for a room full of distinguished musicians and teachers, was terrifying. Yet somehow the idea felt right. "You really think I should?" she asked. Dr. Graves nodded. "I think you must. The committee sees dozens of students each year playing the same repertoire. They'll remember the girl who had the courage to play her own music." She checked her watch. "We have 2 days. Let's refine your piece and prepare you for the audition." The next 2 days were intense but different from the grueling practice sessions of the past 8 weeks. Dr. Graves helped. May strengthened the structure of her composition, suggesting small changes to enhance the emotional impact while keeping the essential character of the piece intact. "Here," Dr. Graves would say, pointing to a section, "the tension needs to build more gradually. Try extending this pattern before moving to the climax." Or, "This transition feels abrupt. Find a way to connect these two ideas more naturally." May absorbed every suggestion, reworking passages, experimenting with different harmonies and rhythms. With each revision, the piece became clearer, more focused, yet still unmistakably hers. Dr. Graves was careful never to impose her own musical voice, only to help May express her own more effectively. By the evening before the audition, they had polished the composition as much as time allowed. May played it through one final time, Dr. Graves listening with closed eyes. "Well?" May asked when she finished. Dr. Graves opened her eyes. "It's ready. And so are you." She gathered her things, preparing to leave. "Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow is important." As Dr. Graves reached the door, May called after her. "What if they don't like it? What if they think I was presumptuous to play my own piece instead of established repertoire?" Dr. Graves turned back. "Then they will have missed something remarkable. But I don't think they will." She hesitated, then added, "May, do you know why I assigned you the Rachmaninoff?" May shook her head. "Because I saw in you what my teacher once saw in me, a pianist with exceptional technical ability who was afraid to reveal herself through her music." Dr. Graves's voice softened. "I needed something that would break through your walls, that would push you to a point where perfect technique was impossible, so you would have to find something deeper to rely on. And I did, May said, understanding now. Yes, you found your own voice. Dr. Graves opened the door. That's what the committee needs to hear tomorrow. Not Rachmaninoff, not Chopin. You. The morning of the audition, May woke feeling strangely calm. She dressed carefully in the simple black dress she'd chosen for the occasion, ate a proper breakfast, and warmed up with gentle scales and arpeggios, rather than frantically rehearsing difficult passages as she would have done in the past. Zoe found her in practice room 7 about an hour before the audition. Hey, she said, poking her head through the door. I just wanted to wish you luck. Not that you need it, you've been working like crazy. May smiled at her roommate. Thanks, and thanks for putting up with me these past few months. I know I haven't been the easiest person to live with. Zoe waved away the apology. Are you kidding? Watching you stand up to the Dragon Lady has been inspiring. The whole dorm is rooting for you. She gave May a quick hug. Go show them what you've got. The audition was held in the conservatory's recital hall, a beautiful space with excellent acoustics and a magnificent Steinway grand piano on stage. May waited backstage, listening as the student before her finished playing a technically flawless but emotionally restrained version of a Beethoven sonata. As she waited for her name to be called, she saw Dr. Graves approaching. The older woman was dressed more formally than usual in a deep blue suit, her silver-streaked hair pulled back elegantly. Any last advice? May asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dr. Graves looked at her intently. Remember that moment 2 weeks ago when you played the Rachmaninoff through your tears? How it felt to let go of everything and just play from your heart. She placed a hand briefly on May's shoulder. Find that feeling again. That's all you need. The stage manager appeared. Maylin, you're up next. May nodded, took a deep breath, and walked onto the stage. The recital hall seemed larger than she remembered, the judges' table at the back casting long shadows. 5 distinguished faculty members sat there, including the conservatory's director, all with neutral expressions and notepads in front of them. She bowed slightly, then sat at the piano. As she positioned herself on the bench, adjusting her posture and placing her hands just above the keys, a strange sense of peace came over her. Whatever happened next, she would be playing her truth, not someone else's composition, not her mother's unfulfilled dreams, but her own musical voice. She began to play. The opening notes hung in the air, simple and clear. As she moved deeper into the piece, she felt herself once again entering that special space where conscious thought fell away, and only the music remained. Her fingers found the keys without hesitation. The pedaling came naturally. The dynamics rose and fell with her breath. Time seemed to both stretch and compress. The piece that usually took about 12 minutes to play felt both longer and shorter, as if she'd been playing for hours and yet just begun. When she reached the final section, where the original theme returned transformed, she felt tears pricking at her eyes, not from sadness or frustration this time, but from a sense of completion, of having said exactly what she needed to say. The final notes lingered in the perfect acoustics of the hall, and then faded into silence. May lifted her hands from the keys and exhaled slowly. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then, from the judges' table, someone began to applaud. May looked up, blinking against the stage lights, and saw the conservatory's director standing, hands coming together in deliberate, measured applause. One by one, the other judges joined him, until the small hall was filled with the sound, and at the back, standing just inside the entrance doors, was Dr. Graves. Even from a distance, Mee could see the smile on her face and the slight nod of her head, a gesture that meant more to her than all the applause in the world. After the audition, life at the conservatory changed for May. Word spread quickly about the student who had played her own composition for the scholarship committee and impressed them. Other students who had previously known her only as the quiet, technically perfect pianist who practiced more hours than anyone else now looked at her with new interest and respect. Is it true that Dr. Graves is helping you develop more of your compositions? Asked Thomas, a violin student, when he bumped into May in the cafeteria a week after the audition. May nodded, still not entirely used to the attention. We're working on expanding the piece I played at the audition. She thinks it could become a full sonata. That's amazing, Thomas said. No one thought the Dragon Lady even liked modern compositions. She's always going on about the classical masters. May smiled at this. She'd learned that Dr. Graves's appreciation for music went far beyond what most students assumed. She believes in authentic expression, whether it's playing Bach or creating something new. The scholarship results wouldn't be announced for another 2 weeks. But May found herself less anxious about the outcome than she would have expected. Something fundamental had shifted inside her. The validation she'd spent years seeking from external sources, perfect grades, competition wins, her mother's approval, now seemed less important than the sense of artistic integrity she'd discovered. Dr. Graves had scheduled additional session times with May outside of her regular lessons. During these meetings, they worked not on repertoire but on composition techniques, with Dr. Graves guiding May through the formal structures and traditions she could draw on or deliberately break from. "Your instincts are good," Dr. Graves told her during one such session, "but instinct alone isn't enough. You need to understand the rules before you can effectively break them." May absorbed these new lessons with the same dedication she'd always brought to her playing, filling notebooks with musical ideas and structural concepts. She began to see patterns and possibilities everywhere. How a simple melody could be developed, inverted, fragmented, or transformed. How harmony could create tension or resolution. How rhythm could drive a piece forward or create moments of suspension. One evening, as May was practicing in room 7, the door opened and a woman she didn't recognize peeked in. "Sorry to interrupt," the woman said. "I was told I might find May Lin here." May stood up from the piano. "That's me." The woman stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind her. She was middle-aged, with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. "I'm Professor Wong from the composition department. Dr. Graves suggested I might be interested in hearing your work." May felt a flutter of nervousness. The composition department was small and highly selective. Most students didn't even consider applying until their 3rd or 4th year. "I'd be honored," May said, gesturing to the piano bench. "Would you like me to play something now?" Professor Wong smiled. "Please." May sat down again, took a deep breath, and began to play. She started with the piece from her audition, now expanded with new sections and refined transitions, then moved into a newer composition she'd been working on, something more experimental that played with irregular rhythms and unexpected harmonies. When she finished, Professor Wong was silent for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "Dr. Graves didn't exaggerate," she said finally. "You have a distinctive voice, raw still but distinctive." She pulled a chair closer to the piano. "Have you considered adding composition studies to your performance track?" May had thought about it, especially over these past weeks, but hadn't dared to voice the idea. "Would that be possible? I'm only a first-year student." "Exceptions can be made for exceptional talent," Professor Wong said. "Let me talk to the department. In the meantime, I'd like to see more of your work." She handed May a card with her contact information. "Send me whatever you have, even incomplete pieces or just sketches of ideas." After Professor Wong left, May sat at the piano, staring at the card in her hand. 6 months ago, she couldn't have imagined this moment. Her path had seemed so clear. Work harder than everyone else, perfect her technique, win competitions, eventually become a concert pianist, playing the established repertoire. Now suddenly new doors were opening, doors she hadn't even known existed. The following morning, May had a regular lesson scheduled with Dr. Graves. As she walked to the practice room, she found herself thinking about how to thank her teacher for arranging the meeting with Professor Wong. But when she arrived, Dr. Graves was already engaged in conversation with someone, May's mother. May froze in the doorway, her heart suddenly pounding. She hadn't told her mother about the change in her audition piece. After her last phone call home, her mother was still expecting to hear that May had played Rachmaninoff's 3rd piano concerto. "May," Dr. Graves said, noticing her in the doorway. "Please join us. Your mother and I were just discussing your audition." May stepped into the room, unable to read her mother's expression. "Mom, I didn't know you were coming today." Her mother stood very straight, her posture nearly as perfect as Dr. Graves's. "I called the administration office yesterday to ask about the scholarship announcement date. They mentioned you'd played an original composition for the audition." Her voice was carefully neutral. "I was surprised." May felt a familiar tightness in her chest. "I was going to tell you, but I wanted to wait until after the results came out. So I gathered." Her mother turned to Dr. Graves. "I must admit, Dr. Graves, when the conservatory assigned you as May's instructor, I was pleased. Your reputation for classical excellence is well known. I didn't expect you to encourage her to abandon standard repertoire. Dr. Graves met her gaze steadily. I didn't encourage her to abandon anything. I encouraged her to find her own voice. Her voice was doing quite well with Chopin and Bach, her mother replied. Was it? Dr. Graves asked quietly. Or was she simply playing notes perfectly without saying anything of her own? May watched this exchange with growing anxiety. The two strong-willed women seemed locked in a silent battle over her future. Mom, she said, finding her courage. I know this isn't what we planned, but when you hear the piece, I'd like that, her mother interrupted, surprising May. I'd like to hear what was so important that you set aside years of training and preparation. May glanced at Dr. Graves, who nodded encouragingly. Of course, May said, moving to the piano. Her hands were trembling slightly as she positioned them over the keys. Playing for the scholarship committee had been nerve-wracking, but playing for her mother, who had sacrificed so much for May's musical education, whose dreams had become intertwined with May's own, felt even more consequential. She closed her eyes for a moment, recalling Dr. Graves's advice, find that feeling of letting go. Then she began to play. As the music filled the room, May kept her focus on the keys, afraid to look at her mother's reaction. She played the piece exactly as she had at the audition, putting all of herself into every note, every phrase, every dynamic shift. When the final notes faded, she finally looked up. Her mother's eyes were shining with unshed tears. May, she said softly, when did you learn to compose like that? I didn't, May admitted. Not formally. It's just what I hear in my head sometimes, what I feel. Her mother turned to Dr. Graves. And you think she has talent for this? For composition? Exceptional talent, Dr. Graves said without hesitation. Professor Wong from the composition department agrees. She's offering May a special track combining performance and composition studies. Her mother was quiet for a long moment, looking at her daughter as if seeing her for the first time. You never told me you wanted to compose, she said finally. I didn't know I did, May said. Not until recently. Not until Dr. Graves pushed me to find out what I really wanted to say through music. Something shifted in her mother's expression, a softening, a letting go of something long held tight. Your father composed, you know. Nothing formal, just little pieces he would play in the evenings. I'd forgotten that about him. This was news to May. Her father had died when she was very young and her mother rarely spoke of him. You never told me that. Perhaps I should have. Her mother sighed, then straightened her shoulders. Well, if you're going to compose, you'll need proper training. Dr. Graves, can you recommend additional resources beyond what the conservatory provides? Dr. Graves smiled slightly. I believe I can. 3 days later, the scholarship results were posted. May's name was at the top of the list, but with an unexpected addition, she had been awarded not only the performance scholarship she'd applied for, but also a special recognition for original composition, an award that included funding for additional study in that field. When May saw the posting, she immediately looked for Dr. Graves to share the news. She found her in her office sorting through sheet music. Dr. Graves, May said from the doorway, I got the scholarship, and something else too, a special recognition for composition. Dr. Graves looked up with a smile that transformed her usually stern face. Congratulations, May, though I'm not surprised. May stepped into the office. I wanted to thank you, not just for the scholarship, but for... She hesitated, trying to find the right words. For pushing me toward something I didn't know I was looking for. For seeing something in me I couldn't see myself. That's what teaching should be, Dr. Graves said simply. Now shall we get to work? That second movement still needs development, and I have some ideas I think you'll find interesting. As May took a seat beside Dr. Graves's desk, she felt a sense of rightness, of having found her true path. The journey ahead would still be challenging. Mastering composition alongside performance would mean twice the work. But for